And under business logics, we have talked about a couple of things. First is formulas. Second is validation rule. So we have already talked about validation rules and formulas. Today we are going to talk about two more business logic concepts. One is workflows. The second is approval process. So we'll start with workflow. Okay, starting with workflows first. So workflows basically, the option for you to workflow is basically the option for you to automate some actions, right? So you can define a logic, and when that logic is committed, or when that criteria is met, the actions can be automatically executed. So that's what a workflow does, right? So what all actions are we talking about when I'm talking about action? What all actions a workflow can automatically perform? One is it can send an email. Secondly, it can update a field. Third, it can send an outbound message. And fourth, it can assign a task to a user. So these are the actions which can be performed, right? So when I'm talking about a workflow, we have the option of defining a criteria, and when the criteria is met, the action can be performed. Okay, one of these actions or more than one of these can be performed. All right. So while we are defining a workflow rule, we have to define a few things. So while you define a workflow rule, you have to define a few things. One is the object for which you want to define the workflow rule. Second is the criteria. Okay, so in criteria, again, we have a rule criteria and then evaluation criteria. And third is action. Okay. So to define a workflow rule, basically you have to define these three things. Which object you want the rule to be defined on? What is the criteria to perform the action? Okay. What criteria should be met to perform the action, and what is the evaluation criteria? So when do you want the criteria to be, when do you want the rule criteria to be evaluated? That's evaluation criteria. And then what action you want to do. Okay. So let me just take a small example. I say, every time a lead is created and it has an email ID, and email should be sent to the lead. Okay, let's say you want to automate this part. Every time a lead is created and it has an email ID, an email should be sent to the lead. Okay, this is, let's say this is what we want to execute. Now let me try to think about these different steps for this. Okay, so this is a requirement. What you have to do if you want to define good workflow rules, just take the requirement, pick the requirement. First thing you have to see whether it can be done through workflow or not. That depends on the action that you want to perform. I said these are the actions which a workflow can perform. Okay, so here we are talking about sending an email. So sending an email is something which can be done using workflow. So we are good to go ahead with the workflow. Okay, so now all that you have to do is you just have to break your workflow rule requirement into these three steps. Okay. So which object are we talking about? We are talking about lead. What is the rule criteria? Email not blank. What is the evaluation criteria? When do you want this rule to be evaluated? When the lead is created. Okay. So this rule should get evaluated when lead is created. What is the action? Send email to lead. That's it. Okay. That's all that you need to do. So initially, while you're working with workflow, it's a good practice to break your requirement into these three things. Which object? Just you just have to answer these questions to yourself. Which object are you talking about? What is the rule criteria? What is the evaluation criteria? And what action you want to perform? That's it. If you spend 2 minutes on this, your life is easy. Okay. Now let's go ahead and define this workflow rule in Salesforce. Give me a moment. Let me just quickly log in. Okay. So we will just go to setup and then go to create. Under create we have workflows and approvals. Under that we have workflow rules. Alright, so you just need to go to the workflow rules. Okay, I can click on continue here. Click on new rule, define the new rule. Which object? So the first question, select object. Which object are we talking about? We are talking about lead. Go to next. What's the rule name? Just define the rule name. It can be anything. Call it lead email. Okay. Rule criteria and evaluation criteria. What's your rule criteria? Email should not be blank. Email not equal to null. That's fine. What is the evaluation criteria? Every time a new record is created. So your rule can be evaluated on these three scenarios. So you have three options. You can say evaluate the rule when a record is created. Second is created and every time it's edited. Created and any time it's edited to subsequently meet criteria. Right? Created, created and every time it's edited. Created and any time it's edited to subsequently meet criteria. Okay, these three options are there. So we want the rule to be evaluated only when a new record is created. Okay, just go to save and next. Alright, so I've almost defined the first two steps. Which object, what criteria we have already defined. Now only thing that we have to do is we have to define the action. Okay, since we are talking about sending an automated email, before we can define that action, we also have to make sure that we have our uh, email template ready. Okay, automated emails and email template also needs to be defined, right? So where will you have the email template? You will have the email template here in your communication templates. Okay, so if you go to communication templates and click on email templates, you will have the option of creating your email templates. You can just click on new email template and define subject line and body of the email template, right? I'm just going to use one of the default email templates which are available, right? Then just go ahead and click on add workflow action and say new email alert. Because I want to perform the email alert. Pick any of the email template. You can actually pick the one that you have defined. We're just going to pick any one of these standard ones. Okay. And who is going to be the receiver of the email? Who is going to be the recipient? The email field on the lead, right? You can actually send it to a certain user. You can send it by a role or something like that. But we want to send it to the email ID which is mentioned in the lead, right? So just select email field and select this. That's it. You also have an option of copying, up to 5 email addresses, basically putting people on CC. So this way you can actually put up to 5 email addresses who will be copied on the email when it is sent to the lead. Click on save. Alright, then just click on done. So we have defined everything for this workflow. We have defined the object, criteria and action. Now finally you just have to go ahead and activate the workflow rule. Like for validation rule, we have to activate the validation rule. For workflow also, it needs to be activated. Alright, how are you going to activate this? You just need to go and click on activate. That's it. So now your workflow rule is activated. It's active. If I go and create a lead, and if the lead has an email ID, an email will be sent to this email ID. Click on save. The moment record is saved, an email will be sent to this email ID. Let me just quickly go and check. That's my email ID. Let me see if email has been sent or not. Yeah, here is the email that we have. Okay, so there's a two, there's a CC. Basically, I actually mentioned my email ID as CC also. So it has been copied. All right. So that's how a workflow rule will work. Now let me know if anyone has any question or doubt here. So if you go to the same workflow rule and you say that when the new lead is created, I want to assign a task to the lead owner to follow up with the lead. Okay, just go ahead, go to this workflow rule, deactivate it, add one more action. So you already have one action, email, click on this edit, add one more action. This time you want to a new task to be assigned to a user. That's it. Assigned to whom? This person. Subject, follow up with lead. Due date, rule trigger date plus 1 day. So the day lead is created 1 day after this. Priority, high priority. So what it's actually going to do, it's actually going to create a task for that user that after 1 day a follow-up task needs to be created for the user. Like, okay, go ahead and follow up with the user. That's it. Okay, so workflow rule basically what it's doing is It performs an action and end of the story. Right? It performs an action and that's the end of the story. Basically, you did a workflow rule and then it triggered some action and that's what it can do. Send an email and that's where it has ended. Okay. Now, for workflow rule action, there are two types of actions. One is immediate action and one is a time dependent action.
Hello, Jeet.
Hello.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah, actually, I was trying to talk to you.
Okay.
Jeet, can you please explain me the
Just hold on for the
third
question
ever?
for some time now. If you can hear me, just
Okay,
hold on for the question for some time now. I've got into a topic. We'll come back to the question
okay,
part.
okay.
Okay. So there are two types of actions. Okay. There is immediate action and there is time dependent action. Now, what we saw just now, we created a workflow rule. The email was sent instantly. We created the lead instantly. The email got sent. Sometimes you need to delay the action. Delay the action means you might want the email to be sent after 2 days or after 7 days. That's a time dependent action. Okay, and you actually don't have to do anything. You just have to go ahead and define a time trigger that after how much duration you want the action to be performed. Got it? So we'll go to the same workflow rule. If you go to the same workflow rule, you will see that there is an immediate workflow action and there is a time dependent workflow action. What is this time dependent workflow action? Time dependent workflow action is basically a workflow action for which you can define the time that I want this action to happen after a certain time. Okay. So for that, for example, instead of sending this email immediately, I want this email to be sent after some time. Then I should not have put this into this immediate workflow action. Then you should remove it from here and put it under the time dependent workflow action. So it's just below that immediate action, time dependent action. Just go ahead and click on add time trigger. You want to perform this action after 1 day from the rule trigger, save. So I have defined a time trigger which will be 1 day after rule trigger. Here you should go and define the email alert which you want to perform. Alright, so all the actions that you define under immediate action will be performed immediately. All the ones that you define after a certain time dependent actions, they will be performed as per the rule trigger. Okay, as per the time trigger that you have defined. So this action will be performed 1 day after the rule trigger date, which is if you create a lead today, the email will be sent tomorrow. Right. Okay. So I think there was some question someone was asking. Please go ahead with your question. Since we understand the first one, created and every time it's edited, these two are clear. Third is created and anytime it's edited to subsequently meet criteria, which means anytime the record is edited to meet the criteria. Okay. So for example, if you say evaluation criteria is created, then your workflow rule will be evaluated only when a new record is being created. Okay, so this is pretty simple. If you select the second one, then your workflow rule will be evaluated every time the record is being edited. So it will be evaluated at the time of creating the record and it will be evaluated every time someone goes to edit the record. No matter what is being edited, doesn't matter. Every time it is edited, it will be evaluated. So in this example, we were sending email, right? So if you put this criteria, then what will happen? An email will be sent to the user when the record is created. and an email will be sent to the user every time someone edits the record. So that's something which we don't want, right? We don't want the email to be sent to the user when when someone is updating the record. Third option is created and anytime it's edited to subsequently meet criteria, which means if the record initially did not meet the criteria, but on that particular edit, if it meets the criteria, then the rule will be evaluated. Okay, so any edit on which uh, the record started meeting the criteria, and prior to that edit, it was not meeting the criteria. So if I have a lead with no email, and if I edit that record and I put email, that means this record has been edited to meet criteria, because before this edit it was not meeting criteria. Okay, so that is the third thing. Clear? Process. Approval process is again very similar to what we do in a workflow. Approval process is also pretty similar to what we do in a workflow room. But approval process is a slightly lengthier process, as you can see. It's a complete process of approval. So what happens in approval process? In approval process, there is some criteria. Okay, a record should meet the criteria. Then approval is initiated. Approval request goes to approver. Approver approves or rejects the request. A record gets approved or rejected based on approver's action. So, okay. So first thing, a record should meet the criteria to go for an approval. Okay. Secondly, the approval process needs to be initiated. Approval process once initiated, an approval request is sent to the approver. Now approver receives the request. He has the option of approving or rejecting the record, and based on whatever he performs, the record finally gets approved or rejected based on the response of the approver. So this is a complete process of approving record. So take a scenario. Any opportunity less than um, 10,000 needs an approval from VP. I say any opportunity which is less than 10,000 needs an approval from the VP. Okay. So how are we gonna do that? So what we'll have to do? First of all, we'll have to define the approval record criteria, and then the record meets any record which meets that criteria. So our approval record criteria is any opportunity where the amount is less than 10,000, right? Then all the records which meet this criteria, they need to be sent for approval, and the VP has to approve it. Okay, so that's how this should be working. Now let's define the process for this. So for an approval process, what all things you need to define? As we talked about workflow, that there are a few things that you need to define. For approval process, what are the things that you need to define? Or what are the questions that you need to answer? Number one, decide on which object. Number two, who is the approver? Number three, what is the entry criteria? Okay, for the records which need to be approved. Number four, action. Okay, so all other things are pretty similar, but approver is one additional thing. Criteria is pretty similar to workflow, object is pretty similar to workflow, action is similar to workflow. Approver is an additional thing because here we need to define an approver also. So approver needs to be defined, entry criteria needs to be defined, action. Okay. Good thing is that action here does not mean in workflow it was just one action, one set of action and the story is over. Here it's not just one action. Here it is action at different stages because it's a long process. So action needs to be defined for initial action, final approval action, final rejection action. Alright. So you have submission action, approval action and rejection action. So you have to define the actions. What action will happen when someone submits the record for approval? What will happen when the record is approved? What will happen when the record is rejected? Okay, so you have submission action, approval action and rejection action. So here you just don't define one set of action, you have to define action for each stage, right? So let me just go and say that on opportunity, I will have a field called approval status, and approval status is going to be pick list. I will update this pick list based on the approval stage. Okay, so my initial submission action should be update approval status equals submitted pending. If the record is approved, this field should get updated to approved, otherwise it should get updated to rejected, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. How are we going to do this? We just have to go to okay, before I can actually start defining the approval process, I will just need to create this approval status field on the opportunity object. So I'm just going to create that field. So pick list field. Pending, approved, rejected. Okay, now we'll start defining the approval process. So for defining the approval process, you just need to go to create workflows and approvals, and under that you just go to approval process. For which object? For opportunity. Okay, select the object, go to jumpstart wizard, call it whatever name you want. Let's define the entry criteria. My entry criteria is that amount less than 10,000. So only the records where amount is less than 10,000, they are eligible for approval. Okay, so you cannot submit other records. Where amount is more than 10,000, they will not be submitted for approval. Only the records where amount is less than 10,000. So that you have defined. Approver you have to define. So you have three options here. You can allow the submitter to choose approver manually, which means this person who is submitting the record for approval, he can choose the approver manually. In some cases, this can be the requirement. You can automatically assign approver based on a hierarchy, or my manager or someone is going to approve, that sort of thing. Or you can pick a particular approver. So in this case, we are picking a defined approver. Okay. If you have more than one approver, you can define more than one approver also here. All right. If you just have one approver, you will define this. If you have multiple approvers, if you want to send the approval request to multiple approvers, then you can select those as well. I'm just selecting one here. Okay. If you have multiple approvers, then you have to select this also. I mean, then this also you need to decide. So what actually it's talking about. See, if I'm sending a request to multiple approvers, there can be two scenarios. Either I want approval from everyone, or I want approval from any one of them. Right? So either I will be happy with anyone. I am sending it to three people. Any one of them approves, I'm okay. Or I would say that all three of them need to approve. Right? So that's what is defined here. So if you have multiple approvers, you have to say that do you need unanimous approval from all the approvers, or you just need the first response. Any first response should be fine. Okay. So that's something which you have to decide when you are using multiple approvers. Here we are just talking about a single approver. So we'll go ahead and click on save, click on OK. Okay. So the criteria and the approver are defined. Now all that I have to do is I just have to define the action. Alright. As I said, here you have to define actions at different stages: submission action, approval action, rejection action. So just go ahead and add submission action. Okay, what do we want to do this time? We want to do a field update, right? Approval status field I want to update. So it's not an email alert, it's not a task, it's basically a field update. Which field you want to update? Approval status. Okay, you want to update it to pending. So when the record is submitted for approval, the field will get updated to pending. Final approval action, the same field update. Approved, save. So in final approval stage, field will be updated to approved. And if record is rejected, so final rejection action is the field will be updated to rejected. That's it. All right. So now I have defined the approval process, approver actions, everything is defined. Now the only thing that needs to be done is this rule needs to be activated. Approval process needs to be activated. Okay, if you don't activate it, it's not going to work. Now approval process is active. So let's see how it works. Create a new opportunity, put amount 9,000. Do we have a validation rule which is going to create a problem? Not sure. No, I'm able to create an opportunity which is less than 9,000. Okay, approval status as of now is nothing, it's blank. because I did not select any value for this. Now, this record meets the criteria for approval. Now, approval request does not initiate automatically. The end user has to submit it. So, where does the end user submit this request for approval? Scroll down towards the end. There's an option of submit for approval. Only the records which meet the entry criteria, they can be submitted for approval. So, click on submit for approval. Click on OK. This record will be submitted for approval. Now, when it is submitted for approval, an approval request will go to the approver. All right, who is the approver in this case? Hema. Hema, can you just go and check your email if you have received an approval request? So now the record has been submitted for approval. You will see that approval status automatically got updated to pending. So initial submission action. Right. Now the
Yes,
approver
I
will
got the
receive.
email.
You got an email, right? So the approval will receive an
Hmm.
email where she will have a link where she can click and approve or reject. So I'll just make you the presenter for a minute. Can you just show us the email? Now, just go to the email and click on the link. Click on the link. The data you were trying to access could not be found. It may be due to another user deleting the data of the system. Okay. Fine. Do one thing. You forward that email to me.
Okay. How to forward this email? ఈమెయిల్ ఫార్వర్డ్ చేయాలా?
Right. So basically, that I think there's some issue forwarding the email, but basically that will just have the link as we saw. There's a link. The approver will click on the link and he'll have the option to approve or reject. The approver can also see the approval request on his home page. Because I am the same user, so I'm logged in as the same user. See, on the home page also, the approver will get to see these items to approve. Okay, so you'll have the option to click on approve or reject. Now he can put a comment here and he can either approve or reject. If he approves, the record will get updated to approve, or whatever action you have defined for approval, those actions will occur. If he rejects, then whatever actions you have defined for rejection, those will occur. Right. So let's say I say approving, click on approve. See, the record gets updated to approve.
I'm not able to see your screen.
Is it the problem with him only or everyone else?
What is?
Anyone who is able to see the screen?
Yeah, I can see the screen.
Yeah, I can see the screen.
Okay.
I can
Even I
see.
can see this.
Okay. So I see some problem with you particularly. So just open the GoToMeeting window. You should be able to see. Click on the GoToMeeting icon in the bottom, what is it, start bar or what we call it. So you should click on the GoToMeeting icon here, and then you should be able to see.